Hey there, this is Natalie, and today I want to talk about Rudeus Greyrat from Mushoku Tensei and how powerful he's going to become as the series goes on. But first, as a quick aside, I'm sorry for the gap since my last non-update video. I'm still having a lot of stress in my personal life for personal and financial reasons, which make it hard to focus on content. I did make a channel update which I uploaded right before this video, so I'm not going to go on about any of that since we are here to talk about Rudeus. But as before, there are links to my Ko-fi and Patreon in the description, and if you can afford it and want to help me out, that would be very, very much appreciated at the moment. Still, with hype growing by the day for Mushoku Tensei Season 2, now we know it's coming in the summer anime season, I want to take a look at Rudeus and talk about what powers and abilities he gets, how strong he becomes, and whether or not he can be considered an OP character in Mushoku Tensei's world. This will contain spoilers about the whole main story, but not for redundancy, jobless oblige, or other side content. Before we begin though, please consider subscribing if you're a fan of Mushoku Tensei, as I already have plenty of content about the series on my channel, and I have some big plans for Season 2, including some collaborations I'm really looking forward to, which are also explained more in the channel update video, so please subscribe and ring the bell. At the time of writing this, I'm extremely close to 40,000 subscribers, and I could do with something to celebrate. So please click the button and I'll do my best to keep things interesting as we come into Season 2. And with the spoiler threat level and begging out of the way, let's talk about Rudy and his OPness. So to start with, it's worth talking about the 7 world powers. This is an idea that we saw introduced in Season 1, where around the world there are rocks that display on them the 7 strongest characters in the world, ranked in order. These update whenever the order changes. You'd think this would give us a very simple way to identify how strong Rudy becomes. Does he ever make it onto the list? And if so, what number does he reach? However, it's not really that simple, because the way the rankings work is not some kind of leaderboard based on some kind of internal stats people have. It's based on the outcomes of fights. So Rudeus does end up on the rankings by the end of the story, but it's because he defeated the person who held that position before him. He could only go higher by fighting and defeating someone higher. Some are characters he's allied with, so wouldn't fight. Others, like the number 1, he never even meets. The number 1 is Technique God, and if you want to know who that is, check out my video on Laplace. Technique God isn't really a factor in the conflicts of the story, so his number 1 position is likely to remain unchanged. He also invented the whole world powers system. We can pretty much negate him from the rest of this then, and treat the number 2 rank as the strongest person, and that's Orsted. Now, Rudeus never becomes objectively stronger than Orsted. Orsted knows literally every technique and magic that exists in the world, and is the son of a god and a demigod. He comes from the strongest race in the setting and has tens of thousands of years of life experience. And Rudy is a human with some talent and a can-do attitude. There could be situations in which Rudy could defeat Orsted, however, because Rudeus knows his weakness of very slow mana regeneration and could potentially exploit that. Though by the time Rudeus knows about this, he's allied with Orsted and so wouldn't attempt to fight him anyway. If Rudeus and Orsted fought to the death, this would actually be about the worst thing that could happen, as if Orsted died, he'd start a new time loop, which Rudeus wouldn't exist in. And given it's the changes having Rudeus born in this loop cause that are giving Orsted the best chance he's ever had of finally killing Hitagami, this would balk everything right up. My point is that while there are ways Rudeus could reach even number 2 in the rankings, that wouldn't actually mean he was objectively at that comparative strength level. Still, he does acquire quite a lot of skills and experience throughout the story, as well as some powerful gear. So let's look at what his powers are, starting with his magic. In Mushoku Tensei there are several types of magic. The first that are the kinds that can be studied, and these are elemental magic, which is mostly offensive, detoxification, and healing magic, and these are cast by the mage using their own mana supply. These usually involve an incantation, which for low-level spells will be a short spell that can be memorized, but for very high-level spells can be whole books long. Rudeus learns in his very early experiments as a kid that he can achieve the results of the spells he's learned without the incantation, and he teaches Sylphie how to do this too. Incidentally, the only type of magic Rudeus can't do without saying the incantation is healing magic. He believes this is because he doesn't know enough about biology to visualize the way he needs to use wordless magic. Sylphie, though, actually can do this. We don't see other wordless magic users for most of the story, as not even the professors at the Magic University can do it, and it's considered a very rare skill. Rudeus does start to teach it later in life though. Also, helping him when it comes to casting magic is that he has an unusually large mana capacity, equal only to Laplace. He theorizes that this is because he started training so young, and that other growing kids would be able to grow their mana pools in the same way. While this does seem to make some difference, the main reason his mana capacity is so big is that he has the Laplace factor, something Sylphie also has. You can find out more about that in my Laplace video. There is a downside to Rudeus's similarity to Laplace, however, and that is that Rudeus can't use something called Tuki, which is effectively a kind of shielding magic that most magic users can wear to protect themselves. This means Rudeus is kind of a glass cannon until he finds other means to protect himself in battle, which I'll come to later in the video. For these styles of magic, there is the same ranking system as for the sword arts in the setting: beginner, intermediate, advanced, saint, king, emperor, and god. It's hard to say just how high Rudeus's potential is in these terms, however, as beyond the king level, the spells start to be the kinds of things that have massive effects on the terrain and world, so can't really be practiced or used in a lot of situations. Instead, Rudeus's preference is to take lower level spells and combine or modify them to achieve the results he wants, basically creating his own custom spells. He learns how to turn a basic earth spell into basically whatever kind of bullet or artillery he wants, and to turn an unwieldy lightning spell into a much more versatile electricity spell. He's said to be using lower level magic, but at a level akin to Emperor. However, since one of the names he's known by in later life is Magic King, it's probably fair to say that that's his overall level. His favoured type of magic is earth magic, and he gets the nickname of Quagmire, not because he's kind of a pervert, but because of his beloved strategy of turning the ground beneath his opponents to mud and shooting earth magic bullets at them while they're stuck. We'll see him start doing this in Season 2, but it basically becomes his signature technique, despite the fact he can use a lot more complex magic. There are also other types of magic in the setting that are performed using magic tools and magic circles, an example being teleportation magic. Anyone can use these if they have access to the technologies, but teleportation magic is worth noting as something Rudeus has access to that most people don't. This is because it's not in common use, but Orsted has set up a network of hidden teleportation sites that Rudeus is able to use to fast travel later in the story. Considering how long it takes to get around the world the normal way, this gives Rudeus a big advantage over most people. Then there are race-specific magic styles that belong to races like the Beastmen and Dragon race that originally came over from other worlds. And if you want to find out how that happened, check out Old Dragon's Tale. I have a series reading the whole novel out on my channel if you prefer listening to reading it yourself. While it isn't possible for Rudy to properly use things like the Beastmen's vocal magic, Rudeus does have the trait of noticing when he encounters something like this that could be a problem for him in the future, and he then focuses on coming up with ways to deal with it. He also does this with other techniques he encounters, like the barrier magic Pax used on him in Season 1, and when Orsted nullifies his magic in their first encounter. So next, let's talk about Rudeus's sword skills. He learns these from Paul early in life, and keeps up training for his physical fitness throughout his later life, religiously working out every day, and even naming his biceps Hulk and Hercules, just to remind us that no matter how powerful he gets, he's still a bit cringe. But sword fighting or physical combat in general really isn't his thing, and it's really just part of him wanting to be prepared for anything. Eris is ultimately the strong physical fighter among his allies, and he's fine with that. This is what makes another of his powers, his Demon Eye of Foresight, interesting. We see Rudeus get this early on, and some people commented that it seemed a bit too easy, him being granted this really cool ability without doing much to earn it, especially when working hard is such a theme in the story. However, due to the way Rudeus usually fights with magic, it really isn't anywhere close to as useful as the skills he did earn, and really just serves to give him a bit of help against enemies if physical fighting becomes necessary. We also see that it isn't so helpful against very high tier fighters, whose movements are impossible to predict. So it's a nice addition to his arsenal that helps round out the skill set he trains the least, physical fighting, but it's by no means an overpowered ability for him specifically. Now let's talk about his equipment. The first impressive magic item we see Rudeus acquire is the staff Aqua Hartia, which Eris gives him for his 10th birthday, though he doesn't use this much later, gaining a more powerful one later on. His staff isn't really something specific to him though, given these are items that can be bought and don't really overcome shortcomings Rudeus inherently has. Instead then, his most powerful gear can be considered his magic armour. This is developed by Zenobia and Cliff mostly, and initially based on information Rudeus learns from Hitagami about the original fighting god armour. But with the research Zenobia and Cliff have been doing into magic circles, they develop a later and better version, the magic armour Mark II. Rudeus needs armour because he can't use the Tuki ability I talked about earlier, which is a natural armour most people in the setting have access to. But because of his large mana capacity, he can operate what is basically magical power armour without running dry too often. Another useful piece of gear that he has for a while is a magical prosthetic arm, also developed by Zenobia and Cliff, that he uses between losing an arm in battle and having access to the high-level healing spells to grow his arm back. Later on they actually start selling prosthetic limbs made using this, to help people who lose limbs adventuring and can't afford the magic to replace them. Another powerful item that Rudeus receives is a bracelet that prevents Hitagami from seeing him, which naturally is very helpful once he's allied with Orsted. He wears this for the rest of his life, meaning Hitagami can't spy on him or connect with him in his dreams, until one time when he's an old man on his deathbed, his grandkid Ferris is playing with the bracelet on his wrist and removes it, allowing for a last conversation between Rudy and the man god. So these are basically Rudeus's abilities and gear. He also acquires some useful pets and great allies across the series, but that's kind of outside of the scope of this video about how strong he himself gets, and ultimately whether or not he's overpowered. Personally, I don't think Rudeus is overpowered for the setting, and none of the important skills, items and abilities he gets come without his own hard work. Whether in terms of actually trying to train hard, being proactive about finding solutions to possible future problems, or building relationships with the right people to help him. These are all things he couldn't have done the way he was in his past life, so very much fitting the point of the story being about him trying harder in the new life. He will fill gaps in his knowledge and capabilities, either by acquiring new knowledge or skills, or forming genuine relationships with people who can do what he can't. Rudeus alone is not strong enough to overcome all of the challenges that come his way, but he becomes good at making allies with all kinds of power, from the political to the martial, and he makes sure to have fun and have a fulfilling family and social life while he's doing it. Rudeus is never even the leader, after the Dead End days, which is interesting in an isekai where usually the protagonist will take on that role. He's a subordinate of Orsted for most of the story, and as someone who never got to have a job in his past life, he actually loves this and takes it very seriously. So, in conclusion, Rudeus becomes strong enough to satisfy those of us who want Mushoku Tensei to provide that power fantasy element of someone whose previous life had gone off the rails, gaining control and getting everything he wanted, and achieving great things, but never reaches that level of him being handed everything easily and becoming overpowered. It's this line the series treads that is perhaps one of the things that makes him such a great main character. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon and to everybody who subscribes to my channel and watches my videos. Thank you for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.